The U.S. military has had a relationship with the nation's top universities since the 1950s. President Reagan solidified the effort to educate military leaders with graduate degrees during the Cold War. Now the Pentagon is rethinking that relationship, accusing the Ivy League and others of being too woke. Chief National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin has details tonight.
With some exceptions, the Ivy League as a whole has pervasive institutional bias and a lack of viewpoint diversity.
Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth is giving the military services until Friday to review the department's long-standing partnerships with the nation's top universities, a move that could cut graduate programs for active duty service members. Earlier this month, Hegseth announced the Pentagon would be cutting ties with Harvard.
Too many of our officers came back looking too much like Harvard. Heads full of globalist and radical ideologies that do not improve our fighting ranks.
Secretary Hegseth has degrees from Princeton and Harvard. The Army has flagged 34 universities at risk of being barred from tuition aid, including MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Duke, Johns Hopkins, Emory, Florida Tech, and all of the Ivies except Dartmouth. Retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, a Penn graduate, served as the Navy's Director of Operations in the Pacific.
It's a very counterproductive proposal by the secretary. Look, I didn't agree with my faculty a lot of the time, but I actually found that gives you critical thinking skills.
Lieutenant Colonel Tim Ryman, an active duty Marine currently at Yale, wrote an open letter to Secretary Hegseth urging him to reconsider. The students I engage with today will very likely become tomorrow's journalists, policymakers, and business leaders. They are future members of Congress who will vote on defense budgets and authorizations for military force. The service academies like West Point and the Naval Academy don't have graduate schools in STEM, computer science, engineering, and graduate degrees in law or medicine. Hegseth says it may be cheaper to send active duty military to state universities.
Hello, Bobby Jones here from MeidasTouch and Valor Media Networks. In the clip you just saw, the Department of Defense, led by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, have announced a new policy to basically have America's senior military officers stop attending some of America's most elite and prestigious academic institutions. Now, the way this is being framed by the current administration is that it's a pushback against, quote, elitism, unquote. But the complete irony of this move is the very people who are claiming to push back against elitism are the very ones who are not only part of that system in that world, but have benefited greatly from it. In this video, I just want to talk about how the pursuit of knowledge, even in the United States military, is not something to be taken for granted. It's actually vital to the proper development of a military force, and even more importantly, gives that military force context on what their powers are and how it's to integrate with the international world. First, let's get this out the way right now. The blatant hypocrisy of such a move, led by Donald John Trump, a man who goes out of his way to let people know that he graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, or as he likes to say, the Wharton School. Now, for those of us who live in the United States, we understand that there's a difference between graduating from the University of Pennsylvania, which is a fabulous elite Ivy League school, and its venerated Wharton School of Business with an MBA. There's a distinct market difference. Trump likes to say Wharton because he wants to blend in the fact that, hey, he graduated from Penn, but did not necessarily get that prestigious MBA. But he uses it as a way to show how intelligent he is, or tries to be perceived as. He also mentions how his uncle was a professor at MIT, et cetera, et cetera. So the very person who is supposedly pushing this agenda has benefited from being a member of that elite class, and even over exaggerating what he actually accomplished there. But he's not the only one. Pete Hegseth, the man who famously in 2022 sent his Harvard degree back, what people fail to realize is that was his graduate degree. He's a two-time elite university participant because he also graduated at Princeton University undergraduate level. And so he went to Princeton and Harvard and went into the United States military as an officer And even with that kind of elite educational background, was seen as a subpar officer, failing to get company command even as an 04. For those of us in the military, we know what that means. That means you weren't ready to lead. You're not good enough to lead, despite having the elitist of the most elite educational experience. And it just doesn't stop with those two. You can go all around the Trump cabinet and just see all of these Ivy Leagues, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Penn, thrown out there as justification for their positions. But if you look at the current state of the United States, the degradation of the economy, of the diplomatic arm of the United States, and hey, the military being used to do things that it typically should not do, the diplomats should actually be doing it. That's a key sign. Why is this a big deal? Well, exposure matters, especially when training people how to possibly conduct war. War is political, it's economical, and it's also technological. Officers need to have access to upper tier thinkers. They need to be part of communities that are highly academic and looking at how moves that they may make or may be responsible for will have ripple effects immediately, midterm, and long term. And that vital cross section of being at elite universities with people who are subject matter experts in a variety of things that military officers are exposed to can make the difference between, hey, having a limited engagement where there are strategic goals that are mapped out and everything falls according to plan, or creating a quagmire that we have seen over the years in various areas. But being exposed to different ways of thinking, being exposed to different ways of seeing the same problem are vital, especially when you're talking about people who are ordering people around and have the fate of their lives in their hands. Winning wars requires ideas. Winning the peace requires the proper execution of those ideas. When you look at something like the Manhattan Project that famously created the nuclear bomb, that was an academic and military strategic partnership, an alliance that literally changed the world. Now, in that case, it brought about destruction mankind didn't even think was possible. However, when you take into account academics and military from a Cold War containment strategy that was developed by scholars and implemented and executed by military forces all over the world. Everything that we know now from modern cyber and AI warfare, it needs and demands intellectual depth and understanding that most people do not have, especially in the military, inherent to its own forces. So you have to go out and look for additional people to help supplement that knowledge gap. Winning wars requires ideas, fresh perspectives, a variety of perspectives. And the United States in particular understood that going into World War II, specifically using academic think tanks to help strategize what they were going to do as far as not just winning the war, but the efforts after the war. Not just the Manhattan Project that brought about the nuclear bomb and changed humanity forever, but how to implement a winning strategy during the Cold War. You had economists and scholars who basically said, hey, you do not want to confront the Soviet Union in a military conflict. Here are other ways that we can formulate that combine economic and diplomatic might as well as strategic military placement. That would not happen if it was just left up to the military or even just the White House. The infusion of different perspectives and different ideas made the difference. Moving forward to today with modern cyber warfare, AI, and other instruments that are being used on various levels, diplomatically, economically, internationally, all of it connected. If you as a military officer, especially a senior military officer, do not understand the intersections of these various philosophies and ideas, you are not equipped to wage and win a war with minimal resources to include human life being utilized. What bothers me most about this major decision, this policy, is the strategic risk. Isolating your officer corps in a move to basically prop up a populist idea is dangerous. What is it like when an officer cannot go into a foreign environment and completely understand the climate, the environment, the people that they will have to deal with? Or what is it like to go into an environment where you have all this weaponry, but have no strategic thought on how to use it because you're not thinking about 3, 4, 5 years down the road when this country is liberated and it has its own government? You're thinking about, hey, the next 3 to 4 hours. That is dangerous. And we've seen that happen with missions that have crept up like Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq. We can go all day with this, but you had think tanks. You have think tanks mostly housed at these elite academic universities that try to warn you based on the history that we have seen, the technology that's being developed now. There are projections on what the future looks like. When you do not expose your officer corps to various perspectives, you are creating future strategic blind spots in the most complex global environment the world has ever seen. And what does this lead to? Well, the second order consequence is very simple. The civil-military relationship and its integration, the one that won World War II, the one that won the Cold War, the one that has helped create innovations across the board, is completely lessened. It's weakened to the point where both sides look at each other as foreigners, not being able to speak the same language. This creates a long-term strategic erosion. Right? We've seen this happen in other countries. The Soviet Union, you had your political arm in the military, and you had the actual war-fighting arm. You have literally political officers and then regular officers. That divide, that thought process of, hey, how do we try to meet these populist goals from the Soviet political side with the reality of what you're dealing with militarily, helped rip apart the Soviet Union's military in the end. And we're seeing the same fractures being created right now. President Trump going and speaking in front of troops and making it seem like it's a political rally. That separation that was supposed to be there is not there, but we're creating separation from those who are supposed to be subject matter experts in the civilian world from the military experts who may actually have to utilize some of the technologies or policies that they come up with. The bottom line is the decision by Secretary Hegseth to come up with this policy highlights something that has been going on for a while. I've mentioned it before, the war on intellectualism, because in their minds, the smarter someone is, the less likely they are to agree with their policies. And you know what? They're right. When Hegseth went in front of every admiral and general in the United States military and they all stared at him like he had a third eye growing out of his head, that was a sign to him that they're not just going to go along with what we say because we say it. When Admiral Alvin Halsey resigned command of U.S. Southern Command because he refused to do the Venezuela raid and he refused to strike boats indiscriminately, that was another sign to Hegseth and President Trump that the military is too smart. They're too smart because they understand what the laws say can and cannot happen, and they understand what their constitutional duties are. And so what have they done? They have pivoted to create a populism versus preparedness tension where, hey, you're going to agree with our culture wars at the sacrifice of us being the most prepared military force we can be. We're going to remove the press corps from the Pentagon with credible journalists and replace it with, social media hacks that we can control, because transparency is something we cannot afford to do. Why? Because we're doing illegal things. That simple. That simple. And so now what do? We go and punish the institutions, the Harvards, the Yales, the Columbias, that helped educate that senior officer corps to be smart enough to push back on things that they know are unconstitutional, against the law, or strategically a blind spot moving forward. But professional military education is not about culture wars. It's about national and international security. And the more we go out of our way to remove professionalism, to remove the best possible subject matter experts from exposing their philosophies, their thoughts to senior military, the more dangerous the world becomes and the less prominent the United States will be.
Love this video? Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel today. You can also gift memberships to others. Let's keep growing together.